team! How is everybody doing? Happy Thursday. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah. So let's yeah. Sorry, I'm waiting for StreamYard to catch up with YouTube so I can kind of see how many people are here. Amazing. My thing says like 4 people watching right now, which is great. I'm so happy to have 4 people chatting with me. This is my second Jack and Coke already, and it's mostly I've had a lot of it. And Star Song, thanks, dude. You're doing my channel stuff for me. Yeah. Triceratops intercellular trafficking is a felony. Hello. Guys, I'm a doctor, and I'm real happy about it. I'm so happy to be done. Somebody, hold on with Maddie on Tuesday, somebody asked me what was like the hardest part of a PhD, and I'm like, just not quitting when you have half of a chapter left to write for the whole thing, and you're like, I could just give up all of this and I don't know, move to the desert in New Mexico, maybe become an artist, try that. That sounds better. So I've been in that kind of mode for a really long time. So the reason I had to push this week is, guys, after my defense, I slept for the next 3 days. I got up, got the baby to daycare, and then came home and fell asleep and woke up in time to get her. And I did that for 3 days. It was very similar to my first 3 days when I got out of the Navy. I wrote it down, so that's the reason I remember it. But my first 48 hours being out of the military, I slept for 22 of them. So tonight might have more breaks than normal. So, okay, I'm in my office, obviously, which as most of you guys know is in the garage. And it's hot as balls here right now, especially in my garage. It's hot and humid. So I didn't want to bring stuff to make drinks out here because then it would be warm, right? And I don't want that. So I'm gonna have to jump in to refresh drinks and all of that. Thank you, Triceratops. Yeah, guys, did you know getting your dissertation with a toddler is a lot? I don't know. I didn't understand. Kupto with the 3 and his deplorable ilk. Glad I got here in time for you to say balls. Yes, excellent. So I might have more frequent short breaks than I normally do. We're just gonna have to feel the vibes. I don't know. I might get a co-host at different points. The call was put out, an invite was put out to the science team, but I wasn't I need a co-host. I was just if you guys want to come hang out, please do. That kind of thing. So we'll just have to see. So I've got Jack and Coke and some limes. And then I've also got a High Point beer. So it's a 10% beer. But once I switch from liquor to beer, I have to stay on beer. And so I'm gonna start with a little caffeine because I've also been doing physical labor today. I've been organizing my house. Everything that I've been ignoring for the last year has been finally at the top of the to-do list. So my mom came and watched the baby and helped me build shelves in the garage. I organized the baby's playroom. We have this weird room off our kitchen. Anyway, you Star Song, you read a fake. Okay, hold on, I'm gonna highlight this. A fake PhD thesis by Isaac Asimov. He wrote for his real paper. The title is On the Endocrinological Properties of Reconstituted Theotimolin. That's delightful. I like Asimov. I always used to recommend him to my very nerdy Navy sailors as yeah, go read some of Asimov's stuff. So listen, when he talks about physics, he explains it really, really well. He's a great writer as well as he was a really good scientist. But I thought what we would start with tonight, maybe, right, is maybe just talk a little bit about what getting a PhD in meteorology and what's sort of normal at my program, to give some context for the folks like not in academia. I have so many friends in academia, right, or with PhDs. Yeah, my baby's gonna defend their thesis while I drink. Yeah, absolutely. Baby did come to my actual defense. She came, she sat through like 45 minutes of my hour-long talk and did great. And then my dad, she was starting to get fussy and like wanting me to hold her. So my parents were there, and so was my husband. So my dad took the baby out, and we have a little cafe on the first floor of the Weather Center. And he got her a chocolate chip cookie. So I have a million pictures of my dad holding the baby while she eats a chocolate chip cookie. You're knitting, Goop Do 3. Excellent. I learned how to crochet 2 days ago. So that's been my new, I had to like turn off the creative part of my brain to just finish, right? I couldn't do any of my creative projects like since Christmas. So like you guys know, you can see all my, hold on, wrong way. You can see all my sewing stuff back there, right? And I've got a 3D printer that I'm bad at using. And so like I couldn't do any of those things that I normally do to like keep my brain balanced and me happy. So I've been a little overdrive in the creative side. Also, I am currently making, hold on, where is it? It's right behind me. Okay, this is my puffy hat. I might need to wear it for a little while. This is my puffy hat for graduation. It won't fit over my ponytail that has morphed into a side ponytail. It was not a side pony when I put it up. So this is my hat, right? Oh, de poof. And I'm going to make the baby a matching one. So I have this little stretchy headband, right? And it's very soft, so it's not going to mess with her head. And this is just an octagon. So I'm going to take this stuff. I got, Joann's was having 75% off remnants. So I got some good fabric for dirt cheap. So I'm going to take this, make a big circle, and fold it into an octagon, tack it onto this, and then baby's got her own graduation hat. I did buy a tassel for her. Thank you very much. I'm very excited that I get the poofy hat and I get a hood. I have to kneel at part of my graduation ceremony. I kneel and get hooded. I asked my advisor if I also get knighted, and he thought I was joking. I mean, I know I don't live under a monarchy, but anywho, okay. So let's talk about like, I know, matching hats. I'm so excited for it. It's gonna be super cute. And I'm going to use the same premise. One of my friends from grad school, she and her husband just had a baby who is a new baby. She's little. She's like a month old. And I'm making her a mushroom hat because she is a little mushroom. So I found this fabric. And I have a white one of those headbands. And it's going to be the same premise, but it will be a mushroom. And I'm going to cover some jingle bells in that red and white fabric, and sew them to socks to give to the baby, because for like 6 months of my child's life, her favorite thing on planet Earth was having on socks that made noise. It was the greatest thing on planet Earth. So I'm going to make my friend's baby mushroom bell socks and a matching hat. We'll see if I do anything else. I don't know. I have 12 million creative projects that have decided to like jump out of my brain now that I stopped dissertationing. Okay, so let's chat about how one goes about, like, what is a PhD defense? What is your committee? Kind of what is this thing that I've been talking about, right? This is blank paper. That can go over there. Okay. So when you start your PhD, you get your committee. Now, I did my master's at the same university, and so my master's committee just carried over, but I added one extra member because for your PhD, you have to have one member of your committee be from a different department. They can't be inside your department. Their sole job, like for meteorology, this outside member could have been from like the music department, right? Mine happens to be from the math department because basically he and my advisor have a deal about being each other's grad students' outside members. Star Song, that's amazing. You forgot when you wrote that paper, but it's a science fictionalized time crystal. That's glorious, and I love it. For me, my master's committee, which is 3 members, became my PhD committee, and then I added a 4th member who's an outside of my department. So my outside member isn't going to comment on any of my methodology or results, nothing that I'm actually doing. Their job is just to make sure that at least like in my field, right? Their job, the outside member's job is to make sure that like no funny internal business is going on. So one, they're to make sure that like no one's getting kind of just like passed through without actually doing the work. But what's much more common is like a department kind of screwing somebody over, right? And so the outside member is like there to be on your side. There to make sure that like if you do the work and your work is good, then you should get to go. Your department can't just screw you over because they don't like you. That's the outside member's job. My outside member slept through most of my defense. He's like an older guy, and he was sitting there. It was at 9 in the morning, and he just fell asleep. He kept startling himself awake. It was great. So then my other members, I just had the 3. That's actually kind of rare in my department. So every university and every college is going to have their own is always going to have their own rules about how you build your committee. I picked mine based off of it. So it's my advisor, another member of my lab group, like the other professor in my lab group, and then the 3rd member is an expert on a specific methodology I knew I was going to use, and so I really wanted his input. And so that was kind of a no-brainer for me. But so like there's rules about how many like tenured versus non-tenured professors you can have. And that's really important in the School of Meteorology at OU because we do a lot of work with NSSL, the National Severe Storms Laboratory, and other like offices of NOAA. And so there's a lot of people who's like their direct supervisor, the person whose like grant money is being spent to make them a student, isn't actually a professor at the university, right? They might have like a technical like adjunct affiliation, right? Which is, by the way, how adjuncts are supposed to be used, not as the default professor type. Anyway, so you'll have like a research scientist at NOAA who has grants to do research and has money to spend to fund a grad student to do their work. And the grad student works for them. Well, they have to have like that guy, their supervisor is obviously going to be on their committee, but they can't like be their committee chair. And there has to be like the majority of the people on the committee have to be like tenured professors. I think it's tenured. Have to be tenured professors at the university. And so I had a friend who was like all field work, and to make the numbers work out with the number of people she was working on at the like outside research group, she had an 8-member committee. And that sounds like an absolute nightmare. Just to get any type of paperwork signed is upsetting. And then working with that many schedules, a nightmare. And so at my university, so a lot of science or especially like engineering programs, right? Like you go from bachelor's straight into a PhD program. You don't do a separate master's, and you sort of are awarded a master's when you finish classes or finish your general. That's kind of how that works. So for a lot of sciences, actually the master's degree is like the consolation prize if you don't finish your PhD, which is a thing. But at my department, the normal progression is to do a 2-year master's and then a 4 to 5 year PhD. So you do a master's, you defend your master's, you write a thesis, defend your master's thesis, and then you start your PhD. And I think that took me 5 years. The PhD took me 5 years, with taking a semester off for a baby, a semester and a half off, honestly, for a baby because of issues around childcare. If I am talking too fast, actually, I can't do anything about it because normally I try really hard to like concentrate on how fast I talk, so I'm a clear communicator. But this is what whiskey does to me. So here we are. We're in for this ride. It's going to be great. I was going to say, tell me and I'll slow down. No, I'm not. I can't slow down. Can't do it. Got to go fast. Got to go fast. We got to go fast. Okay. Then what? Okay. So I did my master's, blah, blah, blah. Now I start my PhD. Some people switch advisors. I didn't. My advisor still had funding for me. I liked what I was working on. So I just like, there was a hair in my mouth. I just like moved forward. Exactly. Tea time tea. Can't stop, won't stop. Gotta keep going. Gotta go fast. Gotta go fast. So my advisor, so my PhD work was sort of a continuation of my master's work. In my master's work, actually I'll show you. I have like one slide in my PhD defense thing that is like the main result of my master's work in a single picture. So I'll show you guys that. And so I jumped in. Then you finish taking your classes. So I spent a couple years still taking classes, starting to do my research, blah, blah, blah. Once you're done taking classes, you do your general exam. I did that while I was pregnant. So I had that done before baby was done. And then you're all but dissertation. So now you're just doing research, writing stuff up, losing your mind. That's how that works. And then, okay. So then you write your dissertation. And there's mine is actually kind of short. Honestly, but I have a tendency for my science writing to be brief, right? I don't like to be like really elaborate. I like to say the thing I'm trying to say and then stop talking. Because I think overly verbose science writing is like technical writing. Overly verbose, overly verbose. Yes, that's the word. Science writing is really hard to understand, right? That's my like communication opinion. And so mine was kind of short. It's with references and figures and all of that stuff. It's like 135 pages, but please know that I have 57 figures. Each of which has multiple plots. Yeah. Triceratops intercellular trafficking is a felony. Brevity is a virtue in technical writing. I certainly agree. Not all sciences. Geology does not agree. Geology thinks we need to sit here and talk about every little aspect about everything. Reasons I can't be a geologist. Can't do it, won't do it. I want to say the minimum thing. Okay. And so then you write your dissertation and you give it to your committee. Now, my advisor had me like iterate every chapter with him. So I wrote a chapter, sent it to him. He gave me edits. I fixed those, blah, blah, blah. And then we move forward. And then, so at some point you give your full written dissertation to your committee, and then they have it my committee had it for 2 weeks, right? It's a minimum of 2 weeks. So a minimum of 10 working days. So they have it for 2 weeks to read it, think about it, make notes, comments on it, but they don't give those back to me until at my defense, right? That's not true at every university. That's just how it works at my university in the School of Meteorology. And so then it's the day of my defense, right? I get up, I give about a 45-minute to an hour-long presentation. Then it's open to questions from anyone from the public. And then it's my committee's turn. And so then my committee asks me questions based both off of what I presented and off of everything else in the dissertation. And they then, like in the old days, they would hand you marked up copies, like printed copies. My committee just emailed me their comments, right? So my outside member had no comments. My advisor had no comments because he'd already gone through it. One of my other members had a good amount of comments, and I'm working through those right now. Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so I answer all of their questions, and then I get kicked out, and then they deliberate, and then they like come out and say like, congratulations, Dr. Frank, and shake your hand. It's a whole thing. My daughter had chocolate chip cookie all over her face for it. It was great. So that was a really, really, really great day. And to be honest, my defense was an overall pleasant experience. I don't think that's common for most people. Like, I was nervous going into it, but I had so many friends and family come, both virtually and in person. Like, my parents drove like the 2.5 hours to be here, and my husband and my daughter were there. I had friends and family from all over the country, like on virtually. And so I had just so much support. And my committee, like, I have a very good working relationship with my committee. They kind of already trusted me as a scientist before going into this event, right? And, on things I had already talked to my committee about the parts of my defense. Hi, alias fake name. The parts of my defense that were their expertise, right? I'd already like worked with them collaboratively beforehand. And so like I'd ironed out the bad bits there. And so that felt really good. And so their questions to me felt like softballs. Honestly, the only one that was a little cutting was basically like, Maddie, did you perchance do your lit review early in this process and then haven't updated it in 5 years? Because some of these references are getting a little old. And I was like, oh, I'm called out because I did my lit review. And like, I actually did my lit review at the start of my master's, right? Because my overarching topic hasn't changed and there's not much new, and so my lit review is from like 2017. And so that's what actually I'm working on right now. I'm editing the introduction with the literature review. And so I'm not, so I am Dr. Maddie, right? I've passed my defense and all of that. I technically still have to turn my defense into into the university library system, but I don't have to do that until May 3rd. And so I'm just slowly working through the one professor's comments that need to be implemented for the dissertation. The other professor who had like really good comments, it was another analysis I could do that would probably strengthen my conclusion. And so it was like, oh, that's a great idea. I would love to do that. Probably going to do it for the paper that I publish out of that chapter, not the dissertation, not the dissertation itself. So anyway, so that's where I'm kind of at. I hope that makes sense as a basic overview of like how a science PhD works. Listen, it was my family are absolutely wonderful people, right? They don't understand what I do. They're all well educated, right? But they're like, so what do you do, right? And I'm like, well, today I sat at my computer for 8 hours and I didn't make a plot, but I got a different error by the end of the day than when I started. So that was great. Or, well, I looked at a plot and I thought really hard for about 3 hours. And then I wrote 3 sentences about it that describes the plot. And that took all day. And like my mom is recently retired. She's a public school math teacher, right? My sister is a doctor, like a physician. She's a pediatrician. And then my dad's in sales, right? So like all of their jobs are associated with like specific tasks, right? And my job is often to sit and think really hard, which I like immensely and I'm good at it, but it's sort of hard to explain as like a job. All right. Hey, you guys want to see my defense? I'm excited about it. I took out the title slide because it's got like my full name and stuff. So, but here's the outline. Here it is. So let me get this up here. We can see it. So the title of my defense is Driving Mechanisms of Very Rapid Sea Ice Loss Events. Can I make this to where this in? Okay, I want it. Okay, wait. You're seeing that. I want to like present it. View. Single page. Hit 99 bugs in the code, 99 bugs in the code. Take one down, patch it around. 127 bugs in the code. Yes. Absolutely. That is my life. Also, I've never like been taught how to program. I have fully just had to learn. But meteorology is such a data heavy science, right? You know, I'm using like 30 years of data where 1 year's file is 30 gigabytes easily. Um like you have to know how to work with big data and data science and all of that. And that part is just sort of that's like on the job training. But okay, so this is my outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are very rapid sea ice loss events, VRILs, and why are they important? Why should anybody care about what I think about all day, every day? And then my dissertation is broken down into three main sections where I tried to get at what causes these very rapid sea ice loss events. And I approached it from three different ways. And I'll talk about why I did that here in a second. So what are VRILs? Why are they important? So a VRIL is when you lose a lot of sea ice in a short amount of time. This little blobby blob here is the amount of sea ice that was lost over the span of like 5 days from a single specific storm. So that specific storm is called the Great Arctic Cyclone of 2012. 2012 is a really special year. Oh, and when I say a lot of sea ice, it's like 250,000 square kilometers in a day. Sorry, I was reading Star Song's comment. So these types of events, they don't happen like every day and not with every cyclone, right? Most cyclones don't have a VRIL, but almost every VRIL has a cyclone that it's associated with, if that kind of makes sense. It's like it's the Smurfs, right? All Smurfs are blue. Most blue things are not Smurfs. So all VRILs have an associated cyclone. Most cyclones don't have an associated VRIL. So 2012 still holds the record of minimum summer sea ice extent. And like this one cyclone was associated with 4.4% of its total ice loss for that summer. And so like these are pretty extreme processes and they can be pretty important for things. So VRLs are important for many reasons. I tend to think of them as those reasons falling into kind of two main categories. One is like improving climate models and improving other types of model performance. Climate and weather models, right? So right now, like climate models, weather models, they tend to do the best where the people live, right? So the mid-latitudes in the northern hemisphere is where climate models and weather models like have the best performance. So if we used like the weather model we use for forecasting here in the United States, if we use that exact same model and didn't change anything about it, and tried to forecast, and these are global forecast models, right? And we looked at the forecast that model gave us for like the southern tip of Chile, it's not going to be as good. It's not as accurate. The model performance isn't as good in those regions. However, so like in the 70s, right? Sea ice, what? And like the 70s, all weather research was in the mid latitudes, because that's where people are. That's where a lot of people are, and also that's where tornadoes are. And tornadoes, I don't know if you knew this, try to kill you like a lot. They're really good at it, and they're less good at it now because we're better at forecasting them. Yeah. Anyway, and so if we want to improve the performance of a global weather model, right, we can't keep making the mid-latitudes better, right? We've got to make like the poles better and the tropics better. And it turns out that if you like improve how a model performs in the Arctic, right, it actually also improves how that model performs in the mid-latitudes. And it often improves how that model performs in the mid-latitudes. So by mid-latitudes, I mean like between 30 and 60 latitude. That's ish what I mean. If you like an improvement in the Arctic improves the mid-latitudes more than most improvements in the mid-latitudes if you were just trying to improve that. blah, blah, blah. I hope that makes sense. So we got to understand sea ice better so that we can make our models better. Important. 2, guys, people are in the Arctic, right? That's a thing. And as the Arctic is warming, more and more people are in the Arctic. That's the thing. And like, especially like shipping lanes, right? Or sea lanes. So in the summer, like the Northwest Passage is a thing, right? But when is that shipping lane, sea lane, whatever you want to call it, when is that going to be open and safe? And then how will it be refilled up with sea ice because you moved it from somewhere else, right? Maybe. I don't know. We can't forecast that right now, right? And so that's kind of like understanding these sea ice processes is important for these reasons. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, what next? 3 proposed mechanisms to cause viriles and my first picture of a sad polar bear. Those are always my Easter eggs in my Arctic science presentations. I try to include sad polar bears as often as I can. So you get these big ol' sea ice loss events, right? This guy, all that sea ice lost. But for why? What caused it? So there's 3 main mechanisms that have been like proposed by the scientists who think about this. One is atmospheric heat transport, right? A surface cyclone specifically, it comes from lower latitudes and it brings with it warm air up into the Arctic, and that warm air is above freezing, and the ice is like, oh God, I should be water now, right? So transport of heat by the atmosphere. Nailed it. This is going so great. 2, ocean waves. So really strong winds can cause ocean waves, and then those ocean waves go in, they break up the sea ice, they make it smaller, and the smaller pieces of sea ice are both easier to melt and easier to transport. So maybe that's what's happening. And the 3rd is actually, I don't focus on it in my dissertation, but it's the one that I think is the coolest. It's ocean upwelling. So the Arctic Ocean is weird because the Arctic Ocean, the density of the water in the Arctic is primarily a function of salinity, not temperature. Whereas everywhere else, it's temperature, right? And so the further down you go in the ocean, the colder the water. Not in the Arctic. In the Arctic, you have really warm, salty water from the Pacific Ocean. No. One of the oceans. It doesn't matter. Warm, salty water here, and then cold, relatively fresh water up here. Yeah, I'm right. This is Atlantic water, and then this is Pacific water. Yeah. I should not second guess myself. Okay. And so when you have strong winds that come across this, it can induce actually vertical mixing. If you don't believe me about that, it's a really cool fluid dynamics thing. And it's I know the word for it because I learned it in my dynamics class. But I'm not going to think of it right now because all I can think of is a math word. That's not the right word. Anyway, so strong winds at the surface make this go like this. And so it brings up warmer water from below the freshwater cap. And so then you can start to melt the ice from the bottom. And I wanted to ask the question with my dissertation, which one more important though? Right? Which of these 3 mechanisms is the most important? And my answer is this. This is the picture that I drew. Is that it's not actually one of them, but a combination of all 3. So you have a cyclone. This is like the North Poles are over here. Can you see my mouse? I hope you can see my mouse. I don't know if you can. That doesn't help me know if you can see my mouse. What's up, Robert? Good evening. Okay, so to the left of the solid ice pack there, that's where the North Pole is. Okay, so this is solid ice pack. And then this is the Arctic Ocean with ice bits floating in it, and that's called the marginal ice zone. And then if we go out to the right, further south, away from the pole, equatorward, if you will, that's open ocean. And so when these events happen, what I think is happening is you have a surface cyclone, that's this guy. This is like a hurricane-sized storm, but in the Arctic. And then this guy interacts with this guy, which is a pre-existing high-pressure system. So this is just a big old high pressure that camps out over the Arctic. The Arctic has at least one, like almost constant high-pressure system that just lives there all the time. That's like the Beaufort High. but you can have different high pressure systems, blah, blah, blah. So you have a low pressure and a high pressure. Boy, howdy, that's going to cause some winds. And so those winds are going to end up going in this diagram straight through the marginal ice zone towards the pole, right? And so in this greeny blob region, we have enhanced winds, which is going to make enhanced ocean waves and vertical mixing. And then the other thing that this cyclone has is a warm sector. So this part of the cyclone is extra warm. And so this is this warm air that then interacts with this ice and melts all the stuff. Cool. So now I have like 3 approaches. So when I was originally proposing my dissertation plan, I wanted to basically ask the question, what causes VRILs though, from a modeling standpoint and from a statistic standpoint. That modeling standpoint is like 2 years of work for no results. Why, you ask? Great question. I would love to tell you. Because no current model, like climate model or any type of coupled sea ice ocean model, allows ocean waves to interact with the sea ice. It says that the sea ice attenuates the waves. It basically assumes that the sea ice is unaffected by ocean waves, in terms of like breakage, right? It can make it bob up and down. They're fine with that, but it doesn't like change the sea ice. So they just don't let it change the sea ice. And so what I wanted to do as like a modeling study was have like atmospheric conditions ready, like say like the atmospheric conditions of the Great Arctic Cyclone, right? Set that up, run a model, try to represent the Great Arctic Cyclone of 2012, and then run the same thing with ocean waves turned off, right? Which are there's often with these like big old coupled models, you can like, what if we, instead of having the ocean solved dynamically, we just solved it from reanalysis, right? We just had like a lookup table, blah, blah, blah. So I could have just turned ocean waves off, right? And then like look at the difference. And that would have told us something about how much ice loss from an event is because of the ocean waves versus atmospheric heat transport. That was going to be such a great study. There doesn't exist a model that can do that. And you're like, Maddie, why didn't you just make that tool? Great. Then I would still be working on my dissertation for the next 10 years, right? It's a good thing to work on. It wasn't viable for my dissertation, right? And people are actively working on this. I get to chat with them because there's like 12 people on planet Earth that care about this thing. And you guys now get to care about it because you're here. And I appreciate you that you're spending your Thursday evening with me. Well, I hope you guys are having something to drink, because then I'm just the asshole in the party that's the only one that's having a drink. I'm going to have to refresh this soon. Okay. I think I'm going to do one more Jack and Coke because I think I need the caffeine. And then I'm going to switch to my DNRs. DNR, oh, it's such a good beer, but it's so high point. That's why it's going to be perfect for this. Okay. So what I ended up doing was I, instead of getting to do that modeling study, I did a very in-depth analysis of comparing Goop 3. Lemonade's delicious though. I did a pretty in-depth analysis of comparing Community Earth System Model, CESM. That is, Gandry, I'm proud of you. You've already finished your bottle of wine. Goop 3, I totally understand. There's times in my life when I can't have alcohol for medical reasons, right? And I totally understand that. Again, I just don't want to be the asshole at the party, right? Anywho, and Gandry, well done. I'm proud of you. Okay. So CESM2, Community Earth System Model, is like the US's big climate model. And they updated it, right? Now it's CESM2 instead of just CESM. Fun fact, CESM is fully open source. It is a bitch to compile and run, and that is very difficult to do. But if you have more computer know-how than I do, you could probably get your own copy of CESM and run your own modeling, like climate model experiments on your own computer if you wanted to. So I really like most of atmospheric science is like open source, openly shares data, right? It's really lovely. It's the correct way to do this. is the correct way to do science. CESM2. Da, 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 da. I like it. So CESM, apart from just a model, they also do a thing called their large ensemble, a lens. So the large ENS for ensemble is where they run 100 different. They run like a climate model out to year 2100, and they do that 100 times with slightly different starting conditions, so you get an idea of like the spread, right? One forecasts up here, one predicts out here by 2100, but 100 members is enough to kind of give us an envelope where like no one of those runs is going to be like exactly right on every variable, but we have a sense of the range of the right answer. It gives us the range of the right answer. If I hope that makes sense, because this is a highly variable and it's a chaotic system. And so you can't just like deterministically solve, right? And these climate models, with what they're running, the math they're solving it's not like AI, it's not the thing that ChatGPT runs on. They are just numerically integrating the full Navier-Stokes equations, right? It's just math. But again, since it's a chaotic system and there's uncertainty in the initial conditions, you run it a bunch of times with slightly different initial conditions to get a bunch of different answers and know that like the true right answer is somewhere in the spread. Anywho, so their new large ensemble came out while I was in my PhD work. And so I was like, great, let's evaluate how the large ensemble handles sea ice, the new one. Amazing. So I spent a lot of time dealing with that. And I also found, thanks to another professor at OU, she's not on my committee, but she's very lovely. CESM2, the model, was adapted to do seasonal to sub-seasonal forecasts. So these are forecasts that only go out 45 days. So just so you guys know, like a weather forecast, like the weather forecast you see on TV, 7 days is like the reliability limit. And I don't super trust them after like 5, right? It's like your error is getting pretty big. But like 7 days is how numerical weather models, that's how good they are. And then climate models kind of ask different questions, but they go out much further. And so that's sort of like, oh, will next spring be warmer and wetter or like colder and drier than last spring? Those types of questions. And so these seasonal to sub-seasonal forecasts are like, how good are we at predicting the weather? And can we improve our ability to predict the weather on timescales of 14 to like 40 days, right? Can we look at that? And so this like other group doing seasonal to sub-seasonal research did a bunch of reforecasts, which is where you take your model, you initiate it with past observations, and then you run it just like a forecast, but now you have the actual observations to compare it to see how good you did. And so they did that for like starting every week. They started a new forecast that ran out 45 days, starting in 1999. So they went back in time to 1999 and ran the reforecasts. And so that meant that I could have ice case studies, that I could see how the model handled the sea ice in its case study. So, the more math you know, the more possibilities you open up for computer programs you may be asked to write. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I talked to some people and I was like, well, I'm having a lot of trouble trying to get like this part of like my code to work. And they just kind of look at me and it's like, can't you like find someone else to do that? And I'm like, no, I'm the someone else. I'm who you call to do that. And I'm mad about it. Okay, so this is just comparing how good is this new model at representing sea ice on short timescales. And then the middle section is looking at what's the most important part of these short-term sea ice losses in terms of statistics. And I used a methodology called multivariate empirical orthogonal functions. And it's really cool and hard to say. And then I built a one-dimensional sea ice ocean wave model, right? Because no models will let ocean waves interact with sea ice. So I was like, what's the simplest version of that I can make? And I did like a beam bending civil engineering thing. And I just wanted to know, is the assumption that that attenuation is real strong, is that good? Is that a good assumption or not? I don't think it is. And my model says it's not. Cool. Amazing. Wonderful. So the rest of this defense is going into those three sections. Okay. So CESM2 large ensemble does not capture short timescale sea ice processes present in NSIDC. That is the observations from the National Snow and Ice Data Center. That's like the US center of that. This is the power spectrum density. So you take a periodic signal, and you want to know, like, what are the most important frequencies, right, inside that signal. So think of this as like if you did this analysis for a major C chord on a piano, like you would have a big spike, right? Like the biggest number over here at like the frequency associated with middle C. And then like the next biggest spike would be at the frequency associated with like the fifth. So like that G. And then the third biggest spike would be at the E, right? So that's like how power spectrum density works. It's you do a Fourier transform on a periodic signal, and it tells you where its most important periods are. So for changes in sea ice concentration, as you might expect, the most important cycle, the most important period is at 365 days, right? So the annual cycle where ice melts in the summer and freezes in the winter, that is a very, very dominant signal. Amazing. This black line here represents, it's a period of 18 days. And look at this. Blue is observations and green is model output. You see this shit? You see this over here where the green and the blue, they don't touch anymore. They're touching over here, and they start to kind of not overlay around 30 days, which is important because 30 days is that like sub-seasonal, right? But look, the shorter the period, the further apart the little guys are. The further apart the guys are. And that tells us that, right? So when they lie on top of each other, like over here, then the model is capturing the same types of cycles, right, as observations is good. In the model, a year is real important, and in real life, a year is real important. But oh man, if we look at sea ice processes below 18 days, then oh my gosh, CESM2, it has very little power. So that tells us that like it's not really capturing significant changes on these scales. Well, but we got significant changes on those scales in real life. Yeah. So in real life, there are lots of significant changes in sea ice concentration at timescales less than 18 days, at those like 2-week timescales. But not in the model. So the model isn't capturing these processes. Cool. What if we just find viriles? So the way we find a virile is you take the daily change in sea ice extent, that's like a time series, and then you filter out anything with a period greater than 18 days. So all this shit, cut all that out. We don't care about it. I just want to look at this shit, right? And then we find the 5% biggest changes in negative changes in sea ice extent and call those viriles, very rapid sea ice loss events. And I plotted them. I plotted the viriles in observations and in model land. So, okay, so what's happening? These pinks, those are those ice loss events in real life. And look, they stack nice on top of each other. There's that like 0.2, right, million square kilometers. But these itty bitty guys, these dark purpley guys, they're in the model space. And they're so little. They're like an order of magnitude smaller than their real life buddies. And so again, CESM2, oh, buddy, you're missing out on these short timescale processes. It's no good. Okay, bam. And then it even doesn't capture the atmospheric conditions associated with those ice loss events. So this is my master's, by the way, in one slide. My master's was more in depth, but this is the main result. Cool. Okay, so don't worry about the color shading on these guys. Over here, the color shading and the contours are the same. This is observations, and this is like 2 different sections of time out of CESM2. In real life, when you have an ice loss event, you get this pressure gradient that goes, so this is negative pressure and this is positive pressure. And my units here are standardized anomalies. So like 1 is 1 standard deviation. Okay. And then if we recenter our like big old picture here and we look, we center it like here instead of here, then, oh man, look at that big old cyclone and then the high pressure system, right? So this is what tells us that in real life, when we get these ice loss events, we've got a low pressure system and a high pressure system, and they're interacting to cause the ice loss. And that low pressure system is a big old storm. It's a surface cyclone. But CESM, the model, it only captures, guys, it only captures the cyclone. It gets the cyclone. It doesn't get the high pressure. It doesn't get the whole story, right? By the way, this lets us build the first step of that overall picture. Low pressure, high pressure, right? Low pressure, high pressure. I found it. That's where I found it. So I put it in my picture. Okay. Oh my gosh. Don't worry about this. Okay. I need to refresh my drink. So let's pause for like a minute. And I'll be right back. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves and I'll be back. So I need to click this button. Oh no, it's this button. I have a thing. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm back. Amazing. Let's look at comments. Oh. Cool. Okay, amazing. So what you guys are looking at now is a case study of that reforecast with the model, right? And so on the left is the model output, and on the right is the real thing. And okay, so there's things we should notice. That one, the ice loss in CESM2 is in the wrong spot. It's shifted over the Canadian archipelago. This is the Canadian archipelago, those little islands. This ice loss is shifted that way. It should be like right off Siberia and Alaska here. So it's in the wrong spot, right? 2, it's missing sea ice gain. In the real picture on the right, we've got those little regions of red. right? We've got periods of ice gain. Here's what's important about that. This event happens in August, right? August 9th, 2012. And temperatures in the Arctic are above freezing at that point. That gain of sea ice, the gain being from freezing, right? That is incredibly unlikely because it's too warm, right? So how do you gain ice if you can't freeze it? You got to move it. So we took some of this ice, right? We took some of this ice. Again, I hope you can. Do I have a thingamajig? No. Can I have a doodle? No, I want a doodle. Okay, edit. Got view. No, okay, I'm sorry, I can't doodle. This is the worst. Okay. So you got to move some of the ice where you're losing it and put it into where you gained it, right? That's how you gain ice in August. And then the third thing about the model is that it is much too small, right? This blob of blue on the left is much less blue than this blob of blue, right? Didn't lose as much ice. So no matter which way we slice it, no matter which way I sliced it, no matter how I looked at how does CESM to capture short timescale sea ice processes, I always came up with it never loses enough ice, right? The model never loses enough sea ice as compared to its observation counterpart. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the big takeaway. Always never loses enough. But the other part, the second bit that's really interesting, right, is this. This is the left. This is the mean sea level pressure in the pretty colors. And the arrows are surface ones. Technically like 10-meter ones, but whatever, it's fine. And on the left is from the model. On the right is from, again, observations. I use a ERA 5 reanalysis as my observational data set, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It gets the cyclone in the right spot. Now, the cyclone in CESM is a little too weak here, but I had to take the average of over 3 days for the left figure, but 5 for the right. For stupid reasons, right? Don't worry about what. So that cyclone could be too small, could be too deep, not deep enough, right? The minimum mean sea level pressure isn't low enough. That could just be because it needs to be averaged for a couple more days to get the lowest bit, right? And I couldn't do it. Okay. So, right? In this picture and in this picture, the model gets the cyclone, but not the ice loss. So that's really interesting. That's really interesting because the cyclone is the mechanism by which you move air, warm air, up into the Arctic. The cyclone is what gets us that atmospheric heat transport component for causing the viriles. So that means, finger wag, that means that the model is capturing like the mechanism of atmospheric heat transport to cause a virile, but it's not resulting in a virile, right? We're getting all the atmospheric heat up there. We're doing that part, but it's not melting the ice. So what's going on? I think there's 2 answers to that, and I can't tell you which one is the right answer because the gosh darn model don't have ocean waves interacting with the sea ice. Either what's happening is heat transport by itself is just not enough to cause the virile, and you need the other 2 components, or the way the ocean waves play with that heat transport term is that you need them to break up that ice into smaller pieces to be affected, right? Because to be affected by the cyclone, right? Like the cyclone could maybe easily melt small pieces of ice, but it's having trouble melting big pieces of ice. And it's the ocean waves that makes the big ice little, right? That could be what's happening. And by the way, we've got another clue as to why that might be the thing. And our clue is, remember this bit? We're missing transport. We're missing ice transport. You know what's really hard to move to transport? Big ice. Big ice is hard to move. Little ice, much easier to move. Astonishing, right? Mind blown. And so I wonder if what the model is missing here is that ocean wave component to break up the ice to let the cyclone do its thing, right? That's what I wonder is happening. That's actually what I think is happening. I just can't prove it, right? I don't have the results to demonstrate that that is in fact what is happening, but that's what I think. Bam. Okay. The next section, guys, I don't know how to make this last section less painful. I'm so sorry. It's so much linear algebra. But basically, a multivariate empirical orthogonal function, or multivariate EOF, is what I'm going to say for the rest of forever. It's a statistical tool to take two data sets and figure out if they have a relationship to each other in space. You could also do it in time. I am doing it in space, right? So you throw a lot of linear algebra on it, and I would be happy to explain that to anybody that actually wants to know. Please shoot me an email, sciencesideUp@gmail.com, and I'll like walk you through what I actually did. But like I put the math professor to sleep with this bit, right? So let's just go straight to the results. So basically, first I do it. No, you know what? I'll explain that in a second. Let's just do this. Bam. And this is just saying that I'm not going to show you all of the results that I showed in my actual dissertation. I'm just going to show like part of them for the sake of time. Robert, I'm so glad you're caught up. Glad you're here. Okay. You can also ignore the right plot, because what the right plot tells me is how many of the left plots I should make. So that's kind of in the weeds here. But let's look at how we read this. How do we read this? And this is a variable I looked at, which is significant height of wind waves, right? So this is when waves are big, this number is big, right? And this is specifically wind-driven waves, not swell, right? So swell is excluded. So this is just that process that we're interested in. Big storm comes in, big winds make big waves. How big those waves comes in this variable. And what I'm trying to relate big waves to is daily change in sea ice concentration. So I'm looking for how do waves relate to sea ice loss. And the way to read this graph on the left is, when waves are big, there is ice loss in the blue and ice gain in the red. So technically this is a like varies directly and varies indirectly type of relationship. But so when the wind waves are big, we have ice loss here, or I have like positive anomalies in wind waves. I have ice loss here in the blue and ice gain in the red. That looks like a transport signal to me, right? That looks like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Surface cyclone, high pressure system, making waves go this way, driving ice away from the edge, out of the marginal ice zone, into the central Arctic, like this. Here's two bits of ice, wave comes in, bam, we moved ice on top of this ice, and so now we have loss in this region and gain in that region. So that's what I think is happening here. And it's the same basic picture in the winter, loss and gain. It's just shifted towards the wintertime sea ice edge, right? So this is the summer picture, and this is the winter picture for significant height of wind waves. Next term I looked at, mean surface latent heat flux. Okay. Atmospheric science stuff. We got to think about heat in basically two ways. How warm is it, right? The actual temperature, right? Or sensible heat, if you will. Sensible heat affects temperature, so does latent heat, blah, blah, blah. Latent heat is the other one. Latent heat is it's energy that you get when water changes phase. I have a video on it in the Weather 101 series. My picture for that series, I drew an arrow backwards because of dyslexia. And I have not remade the video, but I explain it correctly. The picture is just off. So just think, for this case, just think of latent heat is energy, right? It's a heat energy. It's energy we could use to melt ice. And this is mean surface latent heat flux. So this is energy being exchanged between either going from the atmosphere into the ice or from the ice into the atmosphere, right? And that's how that is. And this is the picture we get. How do we interpret this? Okay. This one's tricky. I'm sorry. The data set defines a positive flux to be downwards. Okay, so what this picture says is that if the atmosphere is giving latent heat to the ice, right, then there is ice gain, right? So if I have a positive latent heat flux energy into the ice, then there's ice gain. That doesn't make any gosh darn sense, right? If I'm adding energy to the system and that causing more ice to form, it like to get colder, that doesn't make sense. So we actually want to think about it the other way, because my statistics are sign invariant. So what this red region really does mean is it varies directly. So this could also be if I have a negative heat flux, negative latent heat flux in this red region, I would have ice loss in the red region, right? Because it varies directly. Okay, so that means when the ice is giving energy up to the atmosphere, I have ice loss. How will we achieve this? Excellent question. I would love to tell you. Nebula, congratulations on D&D tonight. D&D is super fun. I hope you had a fun game. So if we have a clear sky condition, and like melt ponds, so like some liquid water, that is a setup where you would have massive upward latent heat flux. Remember, upward here is negative. I know these signs are stupid. This, when I said earlier, like, what did you do today, Maddie? Like, I was trying to explain this to my parents one time, and I was like, well, I looked at a picture for 3 hours, and I thought really hard. This is the picture I looked at because it took me forever to decipher, and I know it makes no sense. But what this picture tells me, after thinking about it for a lot, is that if we have clear skies in the summer, right, then clear skies, that sunshine is shining. The sunshine be shining. And the more sun, the more heat from the sun gets to the ice, causes melt. And this is actually kind of support. There's been other studies that have shown the more clear sky conditions you have in the early melt season, the less ice you'll have at the end of the melt season, right? So that's what I think is happening here. What this is saying is that in the summer, when you have clear skies, that's going to cause melt. And that's what I think this picture is saying. Winter is a different story. So we still get this big red picture. So, but the problem is that in the winter, in the Arctic, there's no sun, right? The sun is down. It's down always. And so what this picture could be picking up is a baroclinic zone is where you have a sharp change in temperature. And sea ice can be much colder than the open ocean, right? Because the ocean cannot be colder than 0 C. Or I forget exactly what it is for seawater, but you get the idea, right? Because if the ocean gets colder than freezing, it freezes and becomes ice. But the ice can be as cold as you like. And that open ocean is the same idea where you will get the upward negative heat flux. But that baroclinic zone is going to favor storms. So what I think is happening here is we're getting a picture, not that one, we're getting a picture of enhanced storminess. So we're getting a signal that supports the formation of storms, and then those storms cause the ice loss associated with it. So this is telling us that those cyclones are really important. Okay. And then last but not least is 2-meter temperature. So for the summer, I get these blobs, right? This doesn't make sense. This says, right, that in the summer, when I have warmer than average temperatures, I get ice losses here and here and here, but ice gains in all the little red regions. And that's like unorganized regions of loss and gain. So that's not physical. One of the downsides of this type of analysis is that it will always give you an answer, even if that answer doesn't make any physical sense whatsoever, but it's like important mathematically. The math doesn't know the difference between the physical system and just the math. So this looks like just the math to me. But what that tells us is that there's not a big signal of 2-meter temperature that's causing subseasonal, that's related to subseasonal sea ice changes, because I removed a lot of the higher order processes for this. So what's cool here is that in the summer, warmer temperatures don't always get you more sea ice loss, right? And colder temperatures don't always get you less sea ice loss from like one summer to the next. And that's probably because it's like, well, yeah, you got to have like, you got to be warmer than freezing. You got to be like warm, but like, that's not the most important thing at these shorter timescales. So this is really important, is that the temperature by itself is not the most important thing for like day-to-day sea ice changes. It might be for like a seasonal average, but not for short timescales. Okay, but in the winter, it's real important. In the winter, it's a very clear leading mode. But what's bonkers, you guys, is this picture says positive anomalies, right? This picture says the warmer the air, the more warm air leads to sea ice gain. So how does warm air make sea ice in the winter? I don't know. Well, I do know. I thought about it really hard, right? But that's really counterintuitive at the top. So this is the picture. What I think, again, is being pointed to here with 2-meter temperature is increased storminess, right? Because when you got a cyclone, right, you got that warm sector of the cyclone. And so what this is saying is, I think, that, hey, we get these warm temperatures coming through, and yeah, that might melt sea ice locally, but that cyclone, it's got winds, it's got stuff, right? And so the winds can act to pull the sea ice through that Bering Strait further south, right? And so we're actually gaining sea ice because we're moving it into the area by the winds from the cyclone. So all of that to say, oh, okay, and then I use another tool to rank these guys from most important to least important. Rank significant height of wind waves, mean surface latent heat flux, and 2-meter temperature. In the summer, it is latent heat is the most important, and then significant height of wind waves. And in the winter, it's 2-meter temperature, then latent heat, then significant height of wind waves. Okay, bam, this is all explaining all of that. So in the winter, that 2-meter temperature plays an important role, then latent heat and significant height of wind waves, but not in the summer. And in all seasons, latent heat plays a more important role than significant height of wind waves. So what does this look like as a picture? I drew you guys a picture. I hope this is helpful. By the way, these are my actual slides from my defense. I didn't like, if I was making this for a more general audience, I would change how I talked about some of this stuff, but I wasn't going to redo it. So here's the picture I proposed in the beginning, right? Surface cyclone, high pressure system here on the left. We got the warm sector. We got enhanced ocean waves from those winds. And then those winds, right? If we look at the second picture, the winds from the cyclone push the sea ice toward the pole ahead of the cyclone and pull it towards the equator behind the cyclone. So we get big regions of sea ice loss due to transport. Triceratops, I'm so happy you like my diagrams. I worked really hard on them. I worked really hard on them, and I'm proud of them too. Okay, so yeah, so the big takeaway from this section is this coupled relationship of increased storminess leading to sea ice transport and loss, like by that ocean wave. And I didn't investigate anything about the upwelling because I was just trying to ask the question, which is more important, getting hot air up to the pole or breaking it up with ocean waves, right? Okay. Which brings me to the third part 3, which is where I built my own model. This is a very short section because, like, I don't show any of the actual, like, plots because there's a lot of them, and I just present my key takeaways. Okay, but I just wanted to answer the question, can ocean waves fracture sea ice flows in the marginal ice zone? That's the question I'm trying to ask. And so in like climate models, they assume that ocean waves don't affect sea ice flows because of physics. It is true that sea ice strongly attenuates ocean waves, right? It's kind of, it kind of acts like a wall to a large degree. The wave like hits the ice and bounces off, right? As that's that attenuation, as opposed to hits the ice and goes into it and then makes the ice be a wave. So it's true that sea ice strongly attenuates ocean waves. That is a true statement. And based off of this true statement, climate models have assumed, therefore, ocean waves don't affect sea ice. No, that's not just like them being lazy, right? That is, we're trying to build a global climate model, and we've got to save computation space and simplify things somewhere. And this was one of the things that got simplified, and maybe it shouldn't have. Right? Maybe it shouldn't have if you want to know things about Arctic sea ice, right? But generally climate models, and like Arctic has only been a big push in climate science for like the last 10 years, right? If you're thinking about when people were first building climate models, like the question is like, how hot is New York going to be in 2050 and what's its sea level going to be, right? So you're a little less concerned about sea ice in that point. You're way more concerned about glacier ice, right? Because remember, sea ice is frozen ocean water. So it melts and freezes from year to year and doesn't affect the overall ocean level. Glacier ice is frozen freshwater, right? So when it melts, it's added to the ocean and it stays there. So glaciers have been like considered more important for answering big climate change questions than like sea ice. But I study sea ice, so I care about it. Okay, the however, comma is this section on observations. There have been a handful of times when there have been like science vessels in the Arctic doing measurements when a big storm came through and interacted with the sea ice. And in those cases, they like on board observed ocean waves to penetrate deep into the marginal ice zone. And so my question is, can ocean waves fracture sea ice flows in the marginal ice zone? And the little subtext there is specifically not only at the edge. Can it get into the marginal ice zone by hundreds of meters and still have enough force to break a flow? So a couple terms I've been using, and I don't think it's common parlance. This is a sketch of the model I built. Please look at my picture. So. Okay, Arctic Ocean. So you've got the solid ice pack, which is where you have this ice has been frozen for many a year, right? It just stays here, and it's a solid mass of ice. And then you have a region called the marginal ice zone, which, oh, I might have a picture. I think I've got a picture. Let me find one. So while I'm doing that, if you guys have questions, anything you want to know, please drop it in chat, whatever have you. Do I have a picture? I guess I could just Google a picture. Hold on. Wait a minute. I have it in an old presentation. I have the picture in an old presentation. This one, maybe. Talk amongst yourselves. Bam, bam, bam. Not that presentation. Oh, did you guys just see all of that? I hope so. No. Okay, good. NSF, was that my NSF meeting? Boo, it's not in that one either. Okay. Then I don't know. Fish orange wide eyes. Excellent. Red Cedar, the goal is to improve the model. So, part of what's happening is, part of the challenge of this is, there's a physics here we don't understand, right? And the fact that I was able to, using a one-dimensional model, answer an important science question is kind of proof that there's some physics here we don't understand, right? And so understanding that physics is really important for then improving how we handle that in the model. But in, say, CESM, so, oh my God, do I have graph paper nearby? Yes. I'm gonna do a picture. Oh, I'm so excited now. Okay. I've got graph paper nearby. I probably need a marker. Ooh, I've got a Sharpie. I've got a highlighter. That's even better. I'm so excited right now. Okay. Boom. Box. 2, 3, 4. Something like this. I'm using graph paper, and the squares that I just drew are not evenly spaced. So I feel great about that. Okay. So computer models, right, work like this. I have data, say, at this. Okay, so I've got, hold on, come here. I've got to do it like this. And I'm going to get this Sharpie. It's going to be great. Okay, so here we go. So I've got this grid, right? And so computers solve, the model is solved not at, right, if this is my computational grid, then the model is solved at this point, and then this point, and then this point, and then this point, right? We have to discretize the math, right? That's how all computers do math. They don't, they only calculate values at fixed points, right? Okay. So on a climate model, you're integrating complicated math over the whole globe, okay? So the step between here and here, this dx, this distance, is, for CESM, it's about 50 kilometers. This is actually on like a lat long grid, but like we'll just do a 50 kilometers, right? And so I only solve the planet, right, every 50 kilometers. By the way, this is why climate models answer fundamentally different questions than weather models, right? Because climate models are taking bigger step sizes because they're solving for longer periods of time. And so the difference in the weather between where you live and 100 miles away is very different, right? Or even 50 miles away. It's very different, right? Right? And so you could have a whole storm system that happens in between these step sizes, right? So we have to use different models, different tools for different sizes of things we're looking at. So oftentimes the model that's like run to give the forecast for your local area isn't solving for the whole globe so that it can do a really fine mesh over where you live, right? Anywho, so this is important. So any process that happens on a scale of less than 50 kilometers isn't solved for dynamically. It's represented by a parameterization, right? So we don't compute it, we solve it, right? So we don't directly solve for these CIS processes. These CIS processes I'm talking about happen over the scale of like a whole virile would be like 2 spatial steps, right? But all of these processes happening in the marginal ice zone. The marginal ice zone is maybe 200 kilometers thick, right? So again, that's like 2 spatial steps in the climate model. So hundreds of meters is doesn't show up in this, right? But we represent it by a parameterization. So there's a different tool that's much less computationally expensive to get at small spatial and timescale processes and get those represented into the model. So a thing that's being worked on right now is something for a new parameterization to bring into CESM2. I've got a couple friends working on it, actually. It's called flow size distribution. Okay, so the flows are those pieces of ice. Let me go back to this and I'll get you guys the picture. So in say, no, this picture, all of those pieces of ice that I like clip arted into my diagram, right? Each of those is an ice flow. It's spelled FLOE. Okay. Currently, climate models use a constant flow size. So all flows are considered to be the same size. That is not true in real life. Flows can be like 10 meters across or 100 meters across, right? They vary by orders of magnitude. And so it's thought that one thing that might improve model performance with these short time scale ice processes is just to include a distribution of sizes, like a statistical average distribution of sizes for the ice flows to be acted on by the atmospheric and ocean dynamic processes. Yeah. Okay. What else? Okay. So I think my work, where my work comes in, is the basic takeaway from my 1D model is that I did find that ice flows could be fractured by ocean waves like 500 meters plus, like up to a kilometer. In the case that I looked deep up into a kilometer, it could fracture it. It depended on a couple things. So what was really, really interesting, team, is that the attenuation factor, right? So how good that assumption of ocean waves don't affect sea ice, how good that assumption was, is buried in the attenuation factor. How much does the sea ice attenuate the ocean wave, right? That factor is a function of the frequency of the ocean wave. So for a wave with a period of 10 seconds, its attenuation factor is 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the attenuation factor for an ocean wave with a period of, say, 3 seconds. Hey, Dr. Dan from Creation Miss is here. Thank you so much. I'm glad you got to go to the supermarket. Yeah, I've been talking about my science. Star Song, absolutely. To get a computer model grid down to a few meters would require like more computing power than exists on planet Earth at this time, right? So that's fully in the realm of quantum computing. We cannot do that. That would take decades to run. That's not gonna work. But you're absolutely right. So Dr. Dan, you're welcome to hop in here if you want. You should have the link in the Discord. But you're more than welcome to just hang out and chat, whatever you want to do, my dude. Okay. So 2 orders of magnitude of difference in the attenuation factor. So what that means, you guys, is that when you have a really strong storm, its highest like energy, high frequency, short wavelength, most energetic, intense waves, those actually don't affect sea ice that much because their attenuation factor is huge. They get trapped on the edge, right? So they can only affect like the first ice flow in the marginal ice zone. It was probably going to destroy that one, right? That one's gone. But that's as far as it can go. So it doesn't have a widespread effect on the ice. So if it was just those waves, then I would say the assumption, Don Giovanni, when do climate models require supercomputer time? My advisor has his own supercomputer so that we can run, like they all do. All of them require supercomputer time. Yeah, like multiple professors in my department have their own supercomputing clusters so that we can reasonably do our work. Right. Right, it's a whole thing. We use giant data sets. The most common supercomputer that like my friends and fellow grad students get time on is Derecho at NCAR, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research. It's in Colorado. Anywho, okay. In Colorado, dude. Okay, so the most biggest waves can't actually affect it that much. But if you look at the long period, long wavelength end of the spectrum for waves caused by storms, those waves can penetrate over a kilometer into the marginal ice zone with sufficient force to fracture the ice every point along the way. That's what I found. Which is really cool. That like maybe we were only focusing on the highest intensity waves, but those aren't actually that important for the marginal ice zone because of the 2 order of magnitude difference in attenuation factor, which is really cool. And I also found that the question of does the ice break, though, can basically be answered by looking at the ratio of the wave drag force to the buoyancy force. And that fundamentally comes down to a relationship. It's like constants and then a characteristic length of the flow, and then the frequency and consequently attenuation factor of the ocean wave. That's what it depends on. If the drag force is comparable to or big, so if that ratio of drag force to buoyancy force is about 1 or higher, then the ice flow breaks. But if the buoyancy force is, if that ratio is like 10 to the negative 1, so like 0.1 or less, then they don't break. The drag force isn't enough to overcome buoyancy. Star Song says, I participated in the Folded Home project, about 1,500 home desktop computers working on a protein folding simulation, and it could take weeks to simulate a few nanoseconds. Yeah, that jives. Protein folding is so complicated, but so cool. I know very little about it, but I think it's awesome. That's really cool. Guys, I love citizen science projects. By the way, I think I'm like planning my kid's future science fair projects. She's 20 months old, but I'm planning her future science fair projects, and I really love the idea of her doing like a citizen science project and then like maybe getting to interview like the PI or something like that. And like do some real science instead of a hokey kids experiment, you know, build a volcano or whatever. But anywho. Okay, I'm going to finish talking about this. Then we're going to take another little break. I'm going to get a new drink. And then I would love to answer all of y'all's questions and just hang out, right? That would, if for honestly, as long as you want. So, okay, so all of that to say, so I found that the question of does it break though comes down to like 2 numbers, right? So what I would love to do moving forward, if I can work forward with this, because my postdoc isn't in this, it's in something else, would be to look at including some version of that ratio in the parameterization scheme with the flow size distribution, to like simulate in a computationally minimal way, simulate these ocean waves interacting with flows, sea ice flows. So if we have this like statistical distribution, so I've got a list of how big the ice flows are, and we know how big the wave is, right? Then it's like a matter of lookup tables to figure out, did that ice break, and update that statistical distribution, right? That's what I'm thinking of. And so I think you could do that in a pretty computationally inexpensive way. And so I would love to do that and then do a very simple experiment where we just look at like how much ice can you lose with this new system versus without it. For like a known, for that case I showed you guys earlier, or I actually did 3 other cases in my dissertation. Okay, so this brings me back all the way to my final picture that I hope I've convinced you guys of. So this type of sea ice loss event is actually asking the question, which of those 3 factors, atmospheric heat transport, enhanced ocean waves, and vertical mixing of that weird, deep, warm water in the Arctic, which of those is the most important, was the wrong question to ask, right? Because in reality, it looks like it's a combination of all 3 that you need to actually get the ice loss. Thank you for your time, and I would love to take your questions. This is where everybody claps. Okay, team, I'm gonna just put us on intermission. I'm gonna go get a beer, and I'll be right back. So take your breaks, do what you need to do, and I'll see you in like less than 3 minutes, hopefully. So I'm gonna put Dapper made me this intermission, and it's so cool. Okay. Oh, did my intermission go off while I was away? That sounds bad to me. Hello. Oh, okay. Thanks for the applause. Goop3 and his deplorable ilk. I've only done one science fair, and I designed my own chromatography project by making dots with different markers and observing the color patterns they made when I added water. That sounds like that is a wonderful child science project, right? I hate it when kids get there's a book of science fair projects and they do one and they make sure they get the same results that they were supposed to, but that looks really lovely. That's a great kids project. Amazing. Okay. So while I've got a few of you all still here, one, I'm happy, whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer. Especially if it's related to my dissertation. So the thing I'm doing next, I took a postdoc position at the same university. We don't want to move. My husband's work is here. I've got a lot of family here. I'm that kind of podunk hick, right? That's I've got a cousin for everything, and that's real useful. So we like it here. And so I don't really want to. So anyway, so I'm doing a postdoc here, and I'm moving into boundary layer meteorology, which is more fluid dynamics, which makes my little math heart just beat a flutter. And it's super fun. Yeah. So I just had that first lab meeting, and so what I'm doing right now. So my new job doesn't officially start until June. So what I'm doing now is finishing up those dissertation edits. Again, it's mostly Maddie, did you forget to update your lit review from when you did it for your master's? And I'm like, maybe I didn't want to take the time to do that because it was done. I love fluid dynamics. Triceratops intercellular trafficking is a felony. It's my favorite. That's kind of what I want to do career-wise, is position myself more as a fluid dynamicist, right? And so I'd love to end up in a math department, but I could also see myself in a mechie department, or even physics. I don't know if I could handle being in a physics department, but fluid dynamics rarely lives in physics departments anymore. By the way, this is my beer. So DNR Coop is a local brewery, and this is a Belgian strong. So it's in the style of a Belgian quad, right? Or in the style of a Trappist ale. But they can't call it a Trappist ale because it's not made by monks in Belgium. And it is 10% alcohol by volume, and it's so good. So anyway, so boundary layer meteorology is the most mathy fluid dynamics-y subfield of meteorology that exists. So I'm really excited to get into that. That's good. Gandry stem locomotidade has a really great question. Gandry, I love this question. That's very insightful. I love it. So does the possibility of salt getting trapped in the sea ice change how the math works? So okay. So yes is the first. Yes, I think is the first level answer. So okay, there are a lot of differences in the material properties of sea ice. So frozen salt water, sea ice versus fresh ice, right? Those two broad categories have different material properties that have to be taken into consideration. However, once you have salt ice, right? How if it's a little more salty or a little less salty, that doesn't significantly affect the properties. So frozen seawater is frozen salt ice, right? And so on the spatial scales, at least that I'm looking at, it doesn't matter to what I did if it's more or less salty, just that it is salty. And there's not like the difference between frozen freshwater and frozen saltwater, right? It's not a smooth gradient, right? It's not like here's purely fresh, and then we get to a little more salty, a little more salty, a little more salty. Over here's really salty, and we have everything in between. We kind of have fresh or salty, and this wiggles a little bit. I hope that makes sense. But that's an excellent question. Okay, Star Song. Your mom would complain whenever you got a new weatherman. The newbies always forget to take into lake effects. Yes, grew up in Michigan. So lake effect snow is the coolest thing. And by the way, that is the fundamental process of all that latent heat nonsense I was talking about earlier with the like mean surface latent heat flux being upwards, and all of that. That's the same like physical processes that causes lake effect snow. So lake effect snow, for anybody that doesn't know, is you have a storm, you got a little cloud, you got a happy little cloud, and it's cold outside, right? And so cold air tends to be very dry, right? And cold air can't hold as much, can't hold very much moisture, right? It's a curvy curve, not a line. For the relationship between temperature and how much water it can hold. And so you have a cold, dry air mass, right, that moves over a lake. And so now the lake is relatively warm compared to the shore, right? And so the air over the lake is relatively warm compared to this cold, dry air mass that just moved over. And so all of a sudden you have moist air from the lake getting sucked up into this cold, dry system that then moves off the lake back to being cold and dry. And it's like, oh God, I have way too much moisture, and it dumps all of it. So you get like, you could have like feet difference of the amount of snowfall on the like far side of the lake versus the near side of the lake. It's really cool. Yeah. So that was my dissertation. I think, again, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to hang out for as long as you guys want. I don't know what else to chat about. Though I am thinking of maybe trying to do this as a kind of series, like maybe have folks like Dr. Dan from Creation Miss. I might be able to get like jump over to the humanities and get like Dr. Josh or Kip Davis. Maybe like I've got like friends of friends to get connections there. And try to have them, who are much further out from their PhD than I am, have a couple drinks and like do it from memory, right? Kind of like drunk history, maybe. The duck chilling in the oh yeah, this guy. Oh, my blue-footed booby. I love him. So I've got my blue-footed booby. Hold on, you can't see everyone. So okay. Blue-footed booby. I actually got to go to the Galapagos, and I bought my little stuffed animal friend to commemorate it. I have there is bobblehead Obi-Wan Kenobi. That one of my yeomen actually got me just as a gift. That is my Rubik's Cube, and then that's my emotional support Batman. Over here. Oh man, Mike, come here. You can't see all my stuffed animals. Okay. Whoa, I did that on the wrong axis. Nope. This friend, that's a tiny stuffed sheep. His name is Tiny Sheep. I got him when I visited Stonehenge. That was super cool. This is a dragon. I got him when I visited my sister when she was stationed in Japan. And so I got a dragon. What's that black thing? Oh, that's a mug that's making fun of math majors. And this is just an owl who is my friend. Yeah. Boom. I got a lot of stuffed friends. I try to get it whenever I travel, especially like internationally. I try to get a stuffed animal from wherever I am. So I took another trip to Japan. My sister ended up being stationed in Japan for a net 4 years. So I have a whale shark because we went to the aquarium in Okinawa and saw they have whale sharks there and they're really cool. Yeah. Treza, I'm glad you said hi to Tiny Sheep. That is his name, and that's the correct greeting. And they have to live out here because otherwise dogs and children try to claim them. Yeah, an emotional support Batman for when uncooked Matthew rolls a crit on psychic damage. There is a dapper Matt with Maddie video where I'm like hugging emotional support Batman through the whole thing. I think it's a Matt Powell video. Because I'm so upset. It was so bad. It was so bad. Oh my gosh, yes, the pre-Yiddish. We have to I don't know if I can be on the stream on Saturday. I don't know if I can be in chat on Saturday for that stream, but I need just the pre-Yiddish to be spammed in the chat for that whole stream with Kim Davis. That was amazing. It was so bad. I told my husband that I told everybody online that he answered with like, does he just mean German? And that everyone laughed and clapped. So that was good. Yeah. Okay, what else is coming up for my channel? Wonderful question. Oh, I might be able to do journal club tomorrow. My mom's been in town and hanging out, and so like I wasn't gonna ignore my mom to do a stream in the middle of the day, but I might be able to do journal club tomorrow. So that would be potentially tomorrow afternoon at 1 Central. We're gonna keep reading through those like heat problem papers. And see how far we can get in an hour or two. But moral story is my mom is going home tomorrow morning because Hannah has stuff she's got to get to. Anyway, so English and German once the same. Yeah, Star Song, you got to check out. So Star Song on Tuesday, I was on a stream. I'm finally back to doing my monthly Matt with Maddie stream where I'm on Dapper Dinosaurs channel and we debunk some really like just F tier young Earth creationists live with a drinking game. And it's very fun. And the phrase pre-Yiddish was thrown out and it broke all of our brains. So if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. Let's see. I don't know what else to do. I mean, like, guys, I might get back to my crocheting project. We've been going about 2 hours, which is good for a stream. I got through my defense again. I'm really upset. I've kind of like instantly sobered up and I don't know why. It's probably because listen, for dinner, I made sure to have a really good dinner because I didn't want to get in and be stupid having a couple whiskeys. You know, actually, I guess I had 3 Jack and Cokes and then I switched to this beer. I didn't want to be completely stupid, you know. And I made shepherd's pie yesterday. Let me rephrase. I made like a very quick cheater version of shepherd's pie, where you don't bake it all together at the end. Because I don't want my mashed potatoes to be crispy. That's the incorrect texture, right? It should be mashed potato texture, or like go full potato pancake. Oh, okay. You saw the pre-Yiddish Star Song. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Such nonsense. Yeah, that's my opinion on potatoes. I don't want like weird hard mashed potatoes from the oven, which is what you get when you bake your shepherd's pie. Anyhow, so I made shepherd's pie. So I had mashed potatoes for a lot of mashed potatoes for dinner, and it was really good. Well then, team, I might let you guys go and let you enjoy your evenings. I hope you have a good one. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will talk to you all soon. Okay. Bye, team.